Welcome to another episode of Architecture Startup Stories interview series with me, Ryan Gorman, founding director of Lofthouse Group. In this series of interviews, we are speaking to the founders of architecture and design studios who are sharing with us their unique insights into the industry, along with the stories of starting up their own practices. On today's show, I'm really excited to be joined by Joe Morris, founder of Morris & Company. We're going to be talking all about his journey in architecture, about Morris & Company and everything in between. And Joe will be sharing with us his advice for anyone thinking about starting their own practice in the future. So Joe, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. Very exciting.
Yeah, no problem. Really looking forward to it. You know, look, you've achieved so much, built a brilliant reputation, and I'd really like to start kind of where it all began, really. So your career as an architect, talk to me about, I guess, the pre Morris & Co, pre Doug and Morris days, and I guess what led you to the point where you then decided one day to start your own practice?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I was sort of had a little think about this, and I think you probably have to sort of go right the way back to when you're like a child, and the kind of this whole kind of nature nurture thing. You know, I'm from a classic, like everyone else, sort of, working class background. I sort of grew up in a really small town in the Midlands, a non-academic, never excelled in anything. Was a bit of a sort of toe rag, I have to say, when I was a bit of a kid, and no real direction, no ambition, no vision. Life just existed, and I guess I was quite good at. I was good at sport. I've always been quite good at sport. I've always been interested in that sort of competitiveness. The sport I tend to have always been interested in is that sort of solo thing. So it's like tennis or badminton or sort of running, that sort of stuff. And maybe I was, relatively good at humanities, and always could draw stuff. And I guess over time, those sort of, this idea of sort of competitiveness or this kind of energy, interested in sort of the environment, I guess, through the humanities, geography, and sort of, being creative, they sort of naturally sort of fell into the sort of pot, which now I realise is, why I've ended up where I've ended up. But alongside that, I think, probably the most important thing, as I think it was, my parents instilled in me a kind of heroic kind of work ethic, as a child. So my father was, he worked for a major sort of car producer in Coventry, and he worked there all his life, bar a kind of stint as a sort of pub landlord. So, this whole idea of kind of the hospitality, I saw it, this, hospitality and retail has been with me in the back of my mind for probably all my life, for this one time where I lived in a pub in a place called Lutterworth, in I think Warwickshire. And my mum worked for a local council as a bookkeeper. So she was really kind of fastidious with kind of figures and matrices and schedules and so forth. So it's got, my dad's a panel beater, car sprayer. Both of them owned a pub. Mum's an accountant. I'm into sport. Somehow all of that in my head makes for the perfect kind of cocktail for kind of an architect, in some ways, I guess. And then I went through this usual thing. I sort of studied architecture at Greenwich. I did really well there against the odds. I did really good in the first year, terrible in the second year, almost failed, then ended up with a first. And I was nominated for the bronze medal. I think I got the sort of second highest mark of the year, and I was astounded that I'd managed to do this. Then went to the Bartlett, found it really intimidating. I sort of flunked the sort of written piece and sort of resubmitted during summer, but did really well in the sort of creative, in the sort of drawing and design part. And then had no real kind of ambition or no real understanding of what to do with it all. So I was, during the whole period that I was studying, and prior to that, I was working in sewing machines, stacking warehouses. I was working in pubs. I was washing dishes. I ended up being a chef at one point for a local sort of venue in my hometown back in the Midlands. And I guess almost ended up following this path where it's like, I'm just going to be a kind of really bad chef for the rest of my life. And then I got a phone call from Paul Monaghan, who was one of my professors at the Bartlett, who sort of said, look, we're looking for someone to come over to do 2 weeks worth of work. this was I got the call and I was watching Wimbledon. I think it was 95 or 96, and I was really interested in sort of, people like Curran and McEnroe and Connors and all that. I was so obsessed with it. And I was thinking, oh God, I could really do with just watching the end of Wimbledon. This, it was like halfway through the championship, and Paul said, "No, you got to start tomorrow, or we can't take you on." And then I joined with this just a kind of an idea that I'm going to work on building a model. And I was there for 8 years. With it's like, and life in some ways, follows from there. That kind of, and I guess that's the thing, serendipity and chance and just taking the moment and plunge has probably stood me in quite good stead since that time.
It's funny how these things happen, right? You don't always plan these things, but spending 8 years at AHMM, talk to me about those years. Yeah,
so I remember, I've got a really good working relationship and with all the partners there, particularly, I guess, Paul and Simon, but, Johnny and Peter as well are just incredibly sort of, have a sort of really central place in my heart, I guess. And there's a real strong sense of family there. And, I remember in the middle of 2003, 2004, incredibly settled, having gone through the normal, I guess, kind of, rotations that, you go in knowing absolutely nothing. I mean, Simon used to say to me, you know absolutely nothing, Joe. And you need to get that in your head. And in some ways, I sort of feel that's a sort of really refreshing moment of kind of reality and kind of awareness, is that, you think, having gone through university, that you come equipped with something. Actually, you're still at the beginning of a kind of a long journey, and you still need to be this sort of really open vessel to your environment and things around you. The university is sort of, it equips you, but the knowledge you accrue through your career is vast and ongoing and never ends. So I did small scale stuff, fit outs. I did a lot of office conversion, and gradually during that period of time went from being a kind of runt of the litter, this mongrel, to someone who could talk with a certain degree of knowledge and experience about stuff. It got to that point in around 2003, as I say, where I had this sort of itch, this kind of gnawing sense that perhaps, I needed, if I don't move now, I'm never going to move. And, AHMM being a sort of family for, almost a decade, including university with Paul and Simon, it's quite a difficult decision. And in the end, it felt to me that rather than sort of going to a new studio, you sort of go solo and you sort of fly the coop and you sort of see what happens. And that's exactly what I did. It was, there was no plan, there's no vision. I didn't have a business plan or a strategy or any real kind of sense of what I was going to be doing, other than if I hand my notice in and I give them enough time. And I think I handed my notice in after a ski trip in 2004. And the first time I ever went, that was it. The first time I ever went skiing is like, why have I waited so long to go skiing? Because skiing is so amazing. And it got me thinking about, what else I'm not doing in my life. And in some ways, that was it. It was like, right, now's the time to hand your notice in. And as soon as you hand your notice in, you've set the path. You're in first gear almost. And you have to get behind the wheel, strap yourself in and see what happens.
What do you think it is about? Because I look at the industry and there's quite a few successful practices that have come from people who are like alumni of AHMM. Is it something about the way that you trained at AHMM that I don't know, instills entrepreneurialism, or is it that you come out well prepared to meet the actual working world as a practice owner? Is there anything that you can think of from your time there that led you to the point where you felt you were ready to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many things, and it's almost like we could just literally just talk about that for hours. I mean, but long and short of it is that the thing about AHMM, and again, I can't compare it to anything else really, because that's the only experience I've ever really had. But what I witnessed through AHMM, I think I got there at a time when they were only, I think I was number 11 in terms of the number of people in the office. It was like really, really small. And when I left, we were about 60, which is kind of where Morris & Company is right now. So I kind of witnessed the growth of the business. I was there in it, and I saw how you go from being a kind of desperate kind of wannabe, in the true spirit of, wanting to be great and wanting to sort of celebrate your accomplishment, whatever, to arriving or having arrived at sort of 60, and what you need to do in order to be able to go through the kind of gears and sort of go through the transition and scale and so forth. And, you know, now looking back, I realized that even at university, Paul and Simon were kind of very unique in that they were very much practice first. And, you know, the culture of practice, or practice being the number one project, was critical. So you kind of, you make sure that you're continuously tending to practice. And practice is more than just getting work. It's sort of defining work, defining an ethos, business and finance projecting, bringing the right people in, creating a culture, you know, serving clients, not your ego, is critical, I think. Humility, accessibility, honesty, you know, removing the spin that I think lots of architects generally tend to get kind of wrapped in, and get, you know, somehow step aside from your own self-importance. And actually seeing that, you know, architecture and buildings are the kind of result of many, many different people, not just, you know, the vision of one single person. And that to me was massively refreshing. And I guess the other thing that AHMM do incredibly well, and again, I'm not talking stylistically, I'm just talking about, you know, an ability to transfer a brief into a kind of real project, is that they've never shied away from the kind of the ubiquitous and the kind of the background and the banal in terms of the work typologies. You know, architects are desperate to work on those kind of premier projects, which generally are cultural based, or kind of large scale kind of regeneration projects where you get to kind of yield a kind of master stroke over a piece of city. You know, at AHMM, we were doing small doctor surgeries, office refurbs, side extensions, converting staircases into small studios for kind of writers and I don't know, health centers and whatever, these sorts of projects which are kind of background and unheralded. And I think what they always did is they gave 110% to every single thing that they kind of applied themselves to. And this idea that, you know, there's never one right answer to this. And you need to be selecting work and selecting direction with other members of the team, including the client. And all of that really, really has stayed with me ever since, and has been a significant sort of foundation to the way that we work.
So with all of that experience and knowledge and seeing the way that Paul and the partners at AHMM do things, what was your vision when you were imagining starting up your own studio? What was your vision of what you wanted it to be? And has that changed at all or evolved over time?
I mean, vision would be putting it slightly elevating what I had in my mind when I started sort of 16 rungs up a ladder. No, I had absolutely no vision at all when I started. It was more a sort of, again, I look back now, maybe it's the, you know, you understand your character, but it was an absolute serendipitous step into the unknown to see what would happen. Whereas where I am now, it's like absolute massive, you know, future vision. And in fact, we're right in the middle as a practice of really trying to carve out a kind of 10-year vision based on, you know, what's happened as the sort of 15 years before us, or whatever it is, 17 years. What's happened in the last year or so, just in terms of the pandemic, the kind of environmental collapse, Black Lives Matter movement, and all those sorts of issues sort of, you know, rolling around, you know, where we need to be as a practice, what we need to be doing. So, you know, day one, it was, you know, how do I pay the bills? And, you know, that was the same from maybe the first 100 days. He's like, what am I going to do to pay the bills? Because I had a mortgage then, obviously, and no track record, nothing to rely upon. You know, the work that I suppose I'd completed at AHMM was AHMM's work. So I didn't want to sort of somehow take a portfolio and pretend it was mine, because ultimately it wasn't mine. It was the work that I did there. So I realized very early on, in fact, actually, sorry, the one thing that when I left, Johnny Hall said in the kind of, I remember his note in the kind of, you know, leaving card, it was something, I can't remember verbatim, but it was something along the lines of, the thing that you have, Joe, which is your primary quality, is your ability to work with people, or something of that nature. It's like, you know, you're a people person, and that's your greatest attribute. And that's the thing which you need to build upon. And I guess, you sort of say, yeah, sure, whatever, and then you put it to one side, and then and then I think 10 or 15 years in, you realise he's absolutely right, and that's the thing which is what the vision that we're working on now is all about, which is just sort of trying to balance these two really critical issues of sort of planet and kind of collapse, and culture, society, and people, bringing those two sort of critical aspects together into one pot.
Well, I want to come on to the topic of veganism, because I've seen that you said about the planet collapse and the issues that we face these days. And I've actually, first of all, I've got to start with thanking you for something which you're not going to be aware of, but this was probably about 3 or so years ago. And I went vegan in January 2017, and being a typical northern lad, I was being asked by my grandparents and family all the time things like, but do you how long is it going to be for? Or have you, but you'll eat meat again at some point, will you? And I found it really hard to articulate the feeling of why I wouldn't. And then by chance, I saw something that you'd posted on LinkedIn. So I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was a long time ago, where I'm pretty sure I remember seeing that you'd likened it to the scene in The Matrix with the red pill and the blue pill. And I can remember reading that and having this like absolute epiphany of being like, that is exactly the feeling that I had of once you understand and you see it, you can't then go back to the time where you didn't know it. So so how did you come to become vegan, and how has it impacted the way that you work, live, and view the world?
Yeah, it's so brilliant you remember that, because it's the one, it's kind of, I'm almost lined the metaphor or the analogy up again, which is Neo uncoupling from the Matrix. It's like, it's that, and it's what I guess what veganism has done for me personally in my practice, my relationships, where I live, has been so profound. It's so massive, and I guess the reason I went vegan in the first place is, so I was in a relatively new relationship, and I think in that with a lady called Ellie, who's also kind of sort of trained as an architect, and she and I both went vegan together. We went vegan in 2017 as well, and I guess maybe, or was it it was either 2016, 2017, around that sort of time. And I think we were kind of very much at that moment sort of living a kind of new kind of emerging relationship, that you kind of in that space where everything is just amazing. The world smells fantastic. And I guess we were just enjoying life, perhaps a little bit too much in hindsight. And you get to that point where you just think, need to slow this down a little bit, because life is more than just sort of celebrating life in some ways, or celebrating life with sort of champagne. There's a certain point where you sort of have to stop. And I guess we were thinking, maybe what we need to do is to sort of reconnect with our bodies, and just to think, about preserving our energy, and finding a kind of greater purpose. And again, it was somewhere between, diet, being a bit more radical, not doing a half version. So, should we be a vegetarian? I was thinking, my character and Ellie's character are both like, it's either all or nothing. And I've been a vegetarian as a teenager for about a decade, and not really understanding why. I think I was doing it at that time purely for, it felt like a healthy thing to do. But I think when I went vegan, it was like an overnight, literally, it was a bank holiday Monday in August 2016. And one of Ellie's friends was relocating to Edinburgh, I think. He was an architect as well, and he and his partner were relocating. There was a little celebration in a pub in Islington. And I think the day before we went, we said, right, tomorrow we're going to be vegan. So let's make this our last non-vegan thing. And we had, I think we had ham and cheese pizza in this pub. And I remember feeling so, having realized that this was going to happen, incredibly sort of guilty at that moment, eating this sort of slices of pizza. And then the following day, being terrified about what you eat, because no planning, there's nothing. So we literally opened a little cookbook and said, well, what do you have for breakfast? Like, Bank Holiday Monday. And we found this incredible recipe for a sort of tofu scramble. with turmeric and garlic and onions and spinach. And we like spinach and onions and garlic for breakfast. You know, what's all this? And I remember eating this incredible concoction that we made for the first time with no practice, never even held tofu in my hand before, and thinking, oh my God, it's amazing. It's so much better than anything I've ever done, blah, 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 blah. And then I think a sort of month or two of eating like that, suddenly you're trying to find the right ingredients. And then as you're sort of looking for ingredients, and as you're trying, you know, as you're working your way through a city, you realize that you can't go into a supermarket anymore in the same way, because you can't, you know, there are aisles of meat and there are aisles of dairy, and there are almost every other thing that you buy in a supermarket has got dairy in it somewhere. You know, bags of crisps and snacks and bread and all sorts of stuff. It's full of dairy. And actually, even those things that don't have dairy and say traces of dairy, possibly, or the factories that were making this in, factories making food, it's probably got dairy in somewhere. So then you're like, oh, crikey, that's incredible. I hadn't realized that. I hadn't realized it was quite so pervasive, sort of everywhere. And so you gradually pull your way back and, you know, uncouple from the matrix. And then you look around you and you realize just how deep the kind of system is, and how ingrained and how bad it is for me, for you, for our children, for the environment, and every sentient being which has effectively been exploited through this system. You know, and as we know, I think the stats are really compelling. The you know, animal husbandry or kind of animal farming is the biggest single contributor to sort of virgin habitat loss globally. So again, more virgin land is lost to rearing cattle than anything else. And it's pretty much up there as one of the three most sort of cancerous systems and industries affecting the kind of our environment at the moment. So, and it is pretty exploitive and pretty brutal. So, you know, what's the compelling reason for not going vegan when you realize that all this is happening? There isn't one in my mind. And then, you know, everything else, it questions everything else. So waste, production, travel, toxicity, building materials, the circular economy, you know, everything is then connected in this sort of same sort of mindset. And yeah, I think we're in the middle of trying to expand on a little domestic project we have, which is called Site. And Site has this sort of, you know, on paper, a kind of collaboration with a sort of restaurant that we're calling Supernature. So Site times Supernature is our current home life experiment. You know, Ellie's business, you know, which I'm contributing purely kind of, you know, emotionally, intellectually, and with dedicating my time as on top of the work that I do at MoCo to try and see if you can show that it's possible to start a business in a pandemic, be based on a circular economy, be wholly good for you, be financially self-sustaining, to be environmentally light, to reuse old buildings, to kind of really, really add biophilia and biodiversity to a place, and actually to make connections with the local community in terms of, you know, trading, in terms of supply chain, in terms of crop growing, in terms of community startup groups. I mean, it's like none of that would have happened if, you know, 4 or so years ago I hadn't decided to go vegan.
Well, I've looked into this Site times Supernature, and you guys are like growing your own mushrooms and vegetables and everything, right? Yeah. We have so it's like an old sort of post office building, it's an ex-post office in a building which is 150 years old. So classic kind of, you know, Tower Hamlets, Hackney borders, Hackney Road, terrace building in a conservation area with sort of stuff sort of happening all around it. So, you know, you look at it, well, it's in a conservation area, probably by virtue that it's old. It doesn't really have any redeeming characteristics, I guess. I mean, you know, in fact, 2 doors down from us a few nights ago, again, just this idea that, you know, you don't really know where you are and you kind of stories continuously emerge. 2 doors down the road from us, about 3 weeks ago, there was about 10 o'clock at night, there was a fire. And it turns out that the building 2 doors down was a cannabis farm.
and the police were sort of dragging out, you know, tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of cannabis plants from the back of this building, like 2 doors down. It's like, yeah, there's another sort of, you know, urban crop growing. Perhaps we're not in that world at the moment, but certainly we're growing mushrooms, growing sort of lettuce leaves, you know, really bringing sort of richness and biodiversity, composting all of our food waste, and using that to grow new food produce, you know, being incredibly seasonal as well. So again, by seasonal, we mean seasonal in a local sense rather than in a global sense. So as you know, the sort of our food system is effectively a global system. So you can be seasonal anywhere, but it's very hard to be seasonal and local. So how do we sort of get around that as well? Ellie's now employing a kind of a mycologist, this young 23-year-old lady who is obsessed with mushroom growing, and so she's going to be basically helping us build in the basement a mushroom farm. She's also our kind of expert kind of garden planter, so we've got raised decks where we're sort of growing all these things. We have the most amazing chef who's also a forager, so he's got a really acute sense of nature and how the hedgerows of the city are an abundant kind of larder for sort of different types of herbs and plants and berries, and he's doing it in a very sensible and empathetic way. So rather than just like cutting the tree down, he basically spends weekends just taking just enough, as if you were kind of, you know, engaged and in tune with nature, to bring it back and then make, you know, all sorts of pickles and jams and so forth. So it's a really exciting experiment, and you know, we're where we are now in Hackney, we're just over a year and a half into this experiment, and just as we're coming out lockdown, it's a super exciting experience to witness people coming in and just celebrating life with us through you know, really kind of ethical food.
So for our listeners that are watching this on YouTube, I will put a link in the description to the website so they can check this stuff out for themselves as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's probably worth
really interesting.
It's probably worth looking at the kind of Site Times Supernature Instagram feed, because that's where we're kind of generally using social media to kind of keep people up to date. But yeah, it's worth, if people are local or fancy a look or ever want to talk about it, we're always able to. I'm always here to talk about it because it's a subject that's really close to my heart.
Awesome. So with all of this, I guess with this newly equipped appreciation of the environment and our impact upon it, how or has this impacted your way that you approach architecture now and the Morris & Co. approach building?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's worth just thinking about how, I guess, I got here, or we got here. And then where we are currently in a kind of transformation, I guess. So for like 15 or so years, we were Doug and Morris, and you know, with two people, you know, a kind of close working relationship with Mary at the time, who was also my partner in life as well for 20 years. We had a kind of really sort of symbiotic understanding of kind of life, I guess, and architecture, and we produced some really amazing work, you know, things like Ortus, which is a health centre in Camberwell, a swimming pool in Buckinghamshire called Alfriston, a swimming pool school for girls, some housing Brentford Lock. We did an adult education centre in Richmond, all of them sort of nationally recognised and sort of, you know, punching above their weight. So we were kind of riding a crest, and we'd managed to go from, when, you know, me starting solo in early 2004 to Mary joining in the end of 2004. Then we had Grace, our first employee, and then, you know, people like Mark and Pete and Adri and whatever. You know, we grew into 40 or so people, you know, with awards too many to write to even sort of begin to remember how many we got. But we got the Stephen Lawrence Award. We won the Manser Medal for the best house. We were shortlisted for the European Prize, the Mies van der Rohe Award. We've won multiple national RBA awards. We won Civic Trust Award, all that sort of stuff. And it dawned on me, as you know, we were going through this, that there was this sort of itch that at no point had any of our work really focused enough on exploring and communicating the kind of urgency in addressing kind of climate change and the kind of the environmental crises. You know, this is all pre-vegan as well. I think also I was becoming increasingly aware, I think, that with Mary and I as a sort of group, a sort of, really close-knit core, I guess, it would be very difficult for anyone else really to grow within that dynamic, if you get my drift. It's sort of it's like a his and hers project. How do we give away responsibility and ownership? And I wanted to, increasingly, and I think Mary perhaps less so. And again, there's no criticism in that, it's just personalities. And I think this sort of the tension in the tension in that kind of wanting to expand and wanting to be focused, I guess, is the best way to put it. So Mary wanted to be really sort of focused on projects and wanted to kind of work in a smaller what's the word, sort of working environment, I guess, project typologies and scale. And I was constantly talking about, the need to be expansive and to be collaborative in a broader sense, and actually to be less focused on architecture as a kind of as a celebration of object, and actually celebrate architecture as a kind of journey of method and process and engagement sort of thing. So, and it got to a point where those two kind of ideals just didn't quite work together, and there was a sort of moment where the elasticity sort of just snapped. And Morris+Company was born, and Mary Duggan Architects was born. So Mary's doing, Mary's still doing stunning work. I mean, the Science Museum, I know that she took when she left, did an incredible job. And actually, I think she's just in the process of converting the house that we built together, which is now owned by a client who's also a creative. And I won't go into too much detail, but it's a project which I think will be stunning. And we have grown, and we have grown into 50 plus people. We're continuing to expand. We now have offices in Copenhagen as well, and that's now emerging. We've won in the last year or so, we've won multiple competitions at a variety of increasing scale. We now have projects outside of the UK, and we're working through the Copenhagen office, particularly a recent project win for a mixed-use building in Munich as well, which has its own complexities in terms of language and kind of local conditions and all the kind of engineering kind of idiosyncrasies which don't exist in the UK. So we're definitely now in this place where we can, for the first time, I guess, with a kind of an idea about massive focus on the environment and on people, we can graft and craft a very liberated sort of 10-year vision. And that's where we definitely are. So, and we are definitely going through that kind of transformation and transition at this moment, trying to be really clear about why we are now working as architects, what our ambition direction should be. And yeah, very much about kind of, celebrating the endeavors of many, many different people, being open and transparent and accessible to the ideals and the ambitions of others. And again, providing a kind of base and forum for people to flourish.
How easy is it to get a client on board with the idea of being, designing a building that's more sustainable and more, I guess, environmentally conscious? Is it an easy conversation to have?
No, it's complicated. And in some ways, I guess, my previous answer didn't really answer your question about, how to design sort of, environmentally. I guess it's all part of that same process. It's just about kind of revealing, demonstrating, mentoring, research, application, evidencing. And, the problem with architecture is that it's so slow. Mm. So, if I remember, the kind of narrative is that when the climate crisis was declared, the fact we had to declare a climate crisis and we all have to sign this thing in some ways is testament to the kind of absurdity of it in the first place. The fact, you need people to tell you that there's a problem, and it's evident everywhere. At the time that was announced, I think there was something like, we've got a 12-year window. Of that 12-year window, we've got about 9 left. And it takes from beginning the process, the time when you're briefed to the moment in which you've delivered a building of scale is about 4 years. Mm-hmm. So if you're delivering a kind of workplace where maybe 1,000 people are going to work every day and, many tens of thousands are going to flow through, that's a 4 or 5 year at least 4 or 5 year program. I mean, we've got a project with Featherstone on City Road, with Derwent London on City Road, called the Featherstone Building, and we've just topped out, and it's 7 years since we started working on this project. We've just broken ground with a project with Stanhope in Shepherd's Bush. Again, 7 years since we first took a brief on that project. So if you've got a 12-year time frame to turn it round, you've got 2 projects or 3 projects to sort of do it in, and obviously that's impossible. It requires determination, it requires continuous research and devotion to the subject. It requires you to continuously sort of harass people and get under people's skin and sort of be frontal and talking about it, knowing that you kind of, in my mind, you have to sort of be in it to kind of be part of the solution. So if you step aside and step away from it, you know that, you know, if people aren't minded to engage with the problem, then the output of that engagement is effectively the most banal, probably the repeated problem that we currently have experienced for sort of decades. But if you can change 2 or 3 things whilst being in that project, and this is going back to, you know, we're not talking about premier projects, we're talking about, you know, the background, you know, fabric of the city projects, gradually changing and demonstrating to clients, knowing that you can do things. And it's like using every single piece of wit and skill and dexterity and kind of, you know, method of communication to sort of inform clients to basically follow you or to lead with you. Yeah, and it's super hard. It really is very hard and very draining.
So I think we could probably talk about that for hours. It's a big topic. Something that I wanted to go back to, I know you, I suppose I want to go back in time again now, to when you first started the studio, first went into private practice. And that is about I know we're doing a bit of a time skip now, but that's about that first week where you've started your own studio and you've taken that leap. Like, what did that first week look like? Did you have projects to work on already? And also, you mentioned that obviously you've still got a big respect for the practice at AHMM. Like, how did you go about getting work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first day of the first week was like a cocktail of emotions and experience, from terror to excitement to anxiety to stress to empowerment to liberate. You know, it's that sort of up and down, you know, a huge sort of leap into the unknown. And as I think I've alluded to earlier, you know, the key focus was literally, how do I make sure that I basically can turn over a sufficient amount of money to feed myself, to pay the bills, and to sort of, you know, keep the roof over my head. And that was pretty much it for the first, like I say, kind of 100 or so days. And I think I guess I was really fortunate when I'd sort of left AHMM, that I'd sort of built up over the 8 or so years beforehand, a sort of, with this idea of, you know, being a kind of people-focused person, I guess, a network of really incredible people that, you know, on a default level, not consciously doing it. It's just like when you step outside of your safe zone, which is being employed and having everything sort of taken care to having nothing, and then making a first call to, you know, what a QS or an engineer or whatever, and say, you know, this is what I'm doing now, you know, what do you think? And suddenly they say, oh, can't believe you've gone, you know, you've decided to go, so we've got a project for you, I've got this for you, I've got this lead for you. And before I knew it, I had too much work almost immediately. I remember you know, the first project I had, and again, not being overly kind of precious about it. So, you know, I was basically, I think the first project I had, Project 01, was basically stage E, old school, delivering technical delivery of another architect's terrace of houses in Deptford. And it wasn't necessarily the architecture was good or bad, or I knew the architect, but I knew the QS, who basically then got into development. He said, look, it'd be great if you could do it, and there'll be so much, you know, more that will come from this. So I thought, well, I'll do that. Then I was recommended to do a kind of pretty major refurbishment to someone's house. And then a landscape architect who I knew introduced me to the owners of the International Design Centre at Chelsea Harbour. And so I had 6 houses were about £1.5 million scheme, a kind of £500,000 house conversion, and a £30 million design centre remodeling and transformation project, you know, as a solo architect in a bedroom. and so you know, straight off the bat, there was an opportunity to kind of, you know, pull people in. So, you know, that's why I sort of, you know, decided that, you know, both Mary and I should go together, and that's why we were able to bring people in particularly quick. But I think over time, you know, I've become more aware of the kinds of projects I think that we should be working on, you know, and the kind of changes and the kind of where the focus should be, and but not being trapped by the kind of classic startup practice whereby you're doing kitchen refurbs and back house extensions. You know, we never really did that at all. You know, and again, it's sort of, I think it was a conscious decision, but it certainly is a decision which has, you know, put us in a particular trajectory, which I guess we're experiencing qualitatively now.
And most people I've spoken to who've done well, it seems to be, what you're saying is something similar that I hear a lot, is that it's about your network, or it's about the people, it's about who you know, the relationships you build as you go along. Because I've had the same conversation with studio owners about how do you go from, you know, like you mentioned, just doing extensions and conversions and breaking into that kind of multiple unit, larger scale projects. And it seems to be relationships with planning consultants or QAs or whoever it might be that you've met in the past. So when you went from being yourself in your bedroom, you got all these projects, there must have been a part of you that had thought, I could do this with me as the sole director, just running it as Joe Morris Architects. What are the positives and what are the drawbacks of, if someone's thinking of starting up on their own, you know, doing it purely on their own and hiring, you know, staff versus being like a co-directorship?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question, and I guess, it's one of those questions where you sort of go, you know, I can talk from my own perspective, but, you know, obviously I am a certain character, and we're all different characters. So, you know, it'll be horses for courses, I guess. You know, it depends whether you're a soloist or a kind of team player, you know, whether or not you're a night owl or an early birder, you know, whether or not your partner that you might sort of go into business with is just a business partner, or whether or not you're going into partnership with a kind of friend or your own sort of life partner. All of those are very incredibly different. But I guess anecdotally, the difference that I've realized between being paired with someone and then starting afresh, I guess, as a solo, and again, we can come on to that in a minute, because I don't actually perceive myself as a sort of solo business owner, is the idea that in the beginning, the kind of the sort of symbiotic, unsaid understanding that two people have with one another means that it's like a second nature. You're both kind of pushing in the same direction intuitively, and with that comes a kind of strong core, kind of protective nucleus, and sort of kind of merging skilled experience and dedication, as it were. Looking at it now, it's like, well, it isn't sort of necessarily a kind of collaborative thing, because actually it's sort of, you know, it almost emerges and it becomes its sort of self-fulfilling sort of prophecy, that the way that you do things in that very kind of close and controlled way is sort of systematic, symptomatic of that relationship. So it's sort of repetition of a similar sorts of thing. Whereas in a true collaboration, where perhaps where I am now, where I might be the kind of on paper the sole owner, but actually I don't perceive ownership of the business. Actually, I very much see this as you know, Morris & Company as a shared endeavor. Particularly, you know, I've got 3 design directors and a practice director who, you know, the business doesn't go anywhere without them. You know, it is they that sort of drive this thing. Have such an amazingly skilled team of associates and seniors and project architects, right the way down. Every single person has a huge part to play in kind of what we're doing right now. So I think maybe the kind of difference is, for me anyway, is that I'm able to make sure that the the kind of career paths and the ambitions of others is clearly manifest and possible, whereas I think before there was definitely, in my head anyway, looking back now, a sort of glass ceiling perhaps that was going to emerge for people. I'm very much in a kind of almost, maybe it's an age thing as well, maybe there's a sort of sense of I'm now 50. I was 50 last year, so I'm in my 51st year, my 6th decade. That's kind of quite sobering thought. And I can't go on forever. So do I want Morris and Company to continue beyond me? I think I do. And it kind of starts to raise a whole sequence of questions about ownership, the business structure, succession planning, and all those sorts of things. And if you're holding the thing to your chest and not allowing anyone in, then that's, to my mind, it's a sort of recipe for failure. If your ambition is to sort of be a kind of vehicle and a mechanism for positive change.
How easy is it? I know in practice or in theory, it's really easy to say, oh, I'm giving away, I'm going to give responsibility to other people and take a bit of a step back and allow other people to run things. But in practice, when it's something that you've built up yourself and you're obviously so emotionally connected with this company and all of the work that goes out of it, like how easy is it to actually practically and emotionally give up that responsibility?
Yeah. Maybe it's one of those things where, in my mind, relatively easy. I wonder whether or not, if we asked others, whether or not that's true or not would be a good question. So it's like, from my perspective, it's been sort of second nature, and I've continuously sought to be as open and honest and accessible, as I say, to others. I'm precious about the work, but not to a degree that it's like, I have to somehow bang my own drum, be overly protective and, fearful and guarded. It's sort of, I'm proud of the fact that, other people are, flourishing within this environment that, I started, but I'm not solely curating at this moment. So it's like, it's just a sort of natural part, I guess, of my character, which is not to kind of compress or resist or kind of place obstacles in the way for people, but to sort of do the opposite. And I often say to people that, my job here I'm not here to intimidate. I'm not here to kind of to be preventative or obstructive. I'm trying to do the opposite, and it's this idea of working immersively, collaboratively and transparently, as much as you possibly can, with all the neuroses and all the things which sort of spin around in the background to that statement. That's kind of where we are.
I was going to say it's testament that you must be doing it successfully, because from my experience of dealing with businesses, it's usually the ones that struggle to break the kind of 20 employee limit are the ones where there's a founder or a director there's not the best distribution of responsibility. And I know that can be a really hard decision for someone to they can want to do it, but not necessarily do it. It's obviously testament that you are, are doing it. I mean, over your years of running, studios, how have you seen the industry change, and do you think it would be any different starting a studio now versus when you did it?
I mean, I guess it has to be. I mean, what are we faced with? Me setting, with Grenfell, for example, is a major scar for the industry, for construction. I mean, it's a bigger single thing that's ever happened in my entire life, actually, and is evidence, if ever there was needed it, of the kind of the broken system of procurement and construction in the UK, and it's so tragic that so many people have had to lose their lives for something of this nature, and to be part of that culture is stressful and very sobering, I have to say. It's changed the landscape rightly on so many levels, just in terms of, thinking, the responsibility that putting materials together and quality and the selection and the specification and the detail of those materials, in some ways I'm incredibly hopeful that there's a lot of positives that come out of it, because if not, then it's been a sort of a very, very the tragedy goes even deeper if the industry doesn't change. So, and that didn't exist. There wasn't I can't think of something close to that, when I first set up. I think the emergence of an acute understanding of the role that construction and architecture has for the damage caused to both the planet but also communities through poor design, poor planning, poorly detailed and designed building fabric, low kind of environmental ambition. All of those have a kind of profound and ongoing issue that, again, I think is more now, at the front of our mind than it ever was before when we first set up. I think the idea, this is a critical one, which comes back to kind of what I've been sort of alluding to throughout this conversation, is the representation of communities and the ability, how can I say it, the importance of ensuring that your work and the way in which you work and who you're working with is as fully representative as it's possible to do. And again, that's a massive challenge. We're in the process right now of going through a kind of our own evolution and our own self-assessment and our own recognition of just how far away we are as an organization from being equitable, diverse and inclusive. And I'm not here to, and I won't be spinning what that looks like. We're going to be really face up, self-critical about, as an organization, what we effectively are and what we need to do to change that and why that's important. And I think, starting up in business now, you'd probably have that sort of built in as part of, one would hope, as part of your sort of the DNA of who you are. Whereas over, it's taken, our business is 17 years old. So we're having to basically kind of massively think about changing the direction of travel. And as I say, this, who we are as a group of people, that's very different. Those two, that's the sort of different landscapes to tackle as well.
It's a huge issue across the industry. It's a huge topic, and I don't think there is one right way of changing. But I think you're right. Honesty and not wanting to.
I think that's it. I think the way of doing it is to suspend the desire to sort of hide and wash and spin. Be honest. Be be self-critical and be transparent and say, actually, hands up, this isn't great. And this is something, this is where we currently are, this is what needs to change, and to set out how you're going to do it, which is kind of what we're in the process of doing now. We're doing a kind of big strategic piece on, how we effectively go from being A to C, say. And I think what's important is to sort of show others, to demonstrate it, to record it, and to communicate it, and to continuously monitor it, and to continuously reveal how it is you're doing against the own criteria that you're setting, and sort of be, whether you're failing or succeeding, in equal measure. Because I think we all have to be doing it. All these crises can't be solved by just one person or just one practice. It's a kind of global problem, and it requires global change.
I think there has to be an element of removing the blame culture and seeing that seeing failure as failure, people seeing failure as failure rather than an opportunity to improve something. And I think often that holds a lot of companies and a lot of people back. what they think people will perceive them as if they, you know, claim that they've made a mistake or they've done failure. Rather, if you don't get to the bottom of it, you can't improve it. Right? And I kind of feel like there's a lot of, because there's so much around those topics at the minute, because they're in the public eye, a lot of people are worried about it. It slows down people's ability to improve if they can't admit publicly, you know, their own flaws. And I think it takes people in the industry at senior level who are visible to kind of lead that, I guess, lead that changing culture, to say that it's okay if we're not there yet. But to be able to get where we need to do, we have to be really honest about where we are now. And actually, interestingly enough, I think that it's a good way of running a practice and managing people, is having that, removing that stigma of not being the finished article yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but kind of being aware of your failings and your weakness is in fact an incredible strength. You know, to be transparent and open to that, to accept that you're going to be critiqued and there's going to be an incredible amount of cynicism placed upon you. You know, it's like, don't worry about it. You know, don't worry about kind of, you know, perception. You know, but work it out. You know, see the problem. You know, resolve the issues. Be encompassing. Include as many people as you can as part of that kind of journey. And as I say, just experience the change, because, you know, if you know where you are and you're able to gradually go on a journey, then you'll experience betterment, and you know, it's positive, and there are kind of qualitative aspects which otherwise won't be there. You won't recognize them, and people won't recognize them.
Well, I'll tell you what, this has been a great chat, and the time has flown by. I wish we could just spend hours and hours discussing everything like this, but I suppose just to come on to a last couple of points to round off the conversation. If someone was thinking or is at that point now where they are considering, you know, looking into setting up their own practice, or kind of thinking about going it alone, what would be your biggest piece of advice?
That's again really, I mean, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, the answer's just, it's instantly full of cliches. But I guess in some ways, you know, they're also they're true, I guess. You know, this whole idea of being truthful to yourself, to listen to yourself, to be open to the input and the efforts of others. You know, I guess one way of looking at, you know, I didn't, as I say, I didn't go into this knowing what I was going to be doing, knowing that I'd even survive. You know, I remember thinking, as long as I can get to 3 years, I heard someone some way say that if you've been around for 3 years, then you've probably got something that is sustainable. So I remember getting to 3 years and feeling the kind of the weight coming off one's shoulders. You know, as a kind of, don't panic. Don't be overly I don't know, plan somehow. Be responsive, be flexible, you know, take chances. You know, as I keep saying, serendipity is actually an incredibly useful thing, you know, going into things which you're not fully in control of, taking a chance every now and again, a leap here and there, you know, working with others, and so on and so forth. You know, all of those are useful. And then there's a whole bunch of other things about, you know, the kind of work that you're interested in, you know, your skills and focus, you know, what you're lacking, what you have in abundance, you know, building the team, you know, thinking about where you'd like to work and who you'd like to work, all those sorts of things. They're all kind of pretty obvious things to sort of consider, I guess.
Great. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time out today to
Pleasure.
talk to me and to talk to the listeners about your story and advice on setting up a practice. I will link your website, all of your various social medias in the YouTube video. Yeah, thanks again, Joe, for being on the show.
My pleasure.